Well, welcome to another installment of our video series, Coffee and Conversation. I am really excited about today's show as we're talking with my good friend, Doug Deason. Doug is a businessman from Arkansas who now makes his home in Dallas, Texas. He's the president of Deason Capital Services, which has numerous investments in technology, real estate, oil and gas, and some other areas. But he's joining the conversation today because in recent years, he's played a huge role in shaping the national conversation around one really important public policy issue. But before I tell you what that issue is, welcome to the conversation, Doug.
Thanks. Well, I appreciate it. Thank you, Grant. It's good to be on with you.
Well, let me kick things off like this. In the May edition of D Magazine, there's a big picture of you on the cover, and the subtitle says, "He's rich, he's Republican, and he's spending his millions, and the way he's spending his millions will surprise you." So let me kick it off by saying, Doug, how are you spending your millions?
So we have the Deason Foundation, which is a pretty good sized foundation that my father has funded, and I'm president of. So most of the stuff that I do now is not involved in the family offices. It's as much as it's involved in the foundation. And we spend a lot of money, millions a year, obviously, trying to accomplish our goals. And what are our goals? They're to create and support programs that empower the poor to lift themselves out of poverty. And that's through criminal justice reform, which is my passion, what I spend the majority of my time on, but also education reform, school choice. And, we just work in Texas mainly on that, whereas CJR, we work in different states and at the national level, federal level. I've been an advisor to Jared Kushner since May of 17. And then the third is free enterprise. And the issue there is that there's so many barriers to entry for the poor or just the middle class. So not just the poor, the middle class, to be able to enter into different types of industries, either because of licensing requirements or because, mainly because of licensing requirements, but also you look at the auto industries, the liquor, wine, and beer distribution industries. You got to be a favored son to be able to get into those industries. So we take them all on.
Well, I love the work you're doing in Texas, and I'm very familiar with the work you've done nationally. I want to dig into your work on criminal justice reform today. And you've been very public about a couple of scrapes with the law you had in your younger years. How did that get you interested or inspire your work today on criminal justice reform?
Well, I actually had more than a couple, but I'll make this brief because it's a long story, and some of your listeners, if they know of me or know me, may be tired of hearing it. I grew up in Northwest Arkansas, where my family had homesteaded in 1840 on my mom's side, in 1862. And obviously I went to the University of Arkansas and, was raised there. So everybody knew everybody. We all back then, Walmart was there, and, my grandfather owned a butcher shop, and he sold meat to the Waltons. It's just a good hometown feel, great place to grow up. And, but there was a lot to do there. So we hunted, we fished, and we partied. And so I got, there's always just, minor in possession controlled substance. I graduated high school in 1980. So the 70s were, a little bit different time than they are now. A friend's father was an executive at Walmart. He got transferred out of Northwest Arkansas, and they left the house. It was a quick deal. They left the house furnished, liquor cabinet stock. He gave me and one of our other friends a key and said, "Go by, mix a drink, but don't have a party. The neighbors are watching." And it was one of several big homes on a hill with long driveways up, right on the edge of between Rogers and Bentonville, with Walmart's based in Benton County. And so very long story short, it worked until it didn't. Several weekends it was fine. One weekend it goes viral without cell phones or internet, and it turned into a party. And so I'm going around trying to get people to leave. They won't. So I know this isn't going to end well. So I go get my car and I'm backing down the driveway. And right as I get to the street, up come police cars, 3 different jurisdictions, Rogers, Bentonville, Benton County, lights flashing, get out, guns drawn, get us out of the car. They think it's a burglary in process. And I'm actually, in their minds, I've got a car full of stuff I've stolen out of the house. Well, of course, that wasn't true. They find out I don't have anything. I tell them the story. So they kind of lighten up a little bit, take us up to the house, and gather all the kids in one room. And then they say, okay, we're going to take everyone in for burglary unless the instigators want to stand up and tell us who you are. So he and I raised our hands. They handcuffed us to the back car, took us to Bentonville or Benton County jail, and got to call my mom again and say, I've been arrested. What was that for? Oh no, what is it? And I told her. She goes, that's not a felony, is it? And I said, hey, is that a felony? And the police officer said, yeah, it is. And I said, yeah, it's a felony. It meant nothing. I didn't know I was 17 years old. And, she was in a panic then. And so she came over and got me and bailed me out, and she was not happy. And I had, a rough Sunday. That was a Saturday night, so Sunday wasn't that great. On Monday, she calls the Benton County attorney, who was Asa Hutchinson, who's now the governor of Arkansas. And, she said, tell him what happened. He said, Bonnie, don't worry about it. I heard about that. He goes, let's just drop the charges to criminal trespass. And if he'll pay a $150 fine and 6 months probation, and if he keeps his nose clean, we'll expunge his record. And so it worked. It was tough. It was between my junior and senior year, but I kept my nose clean, so I paid $150 and got it. It ended up getting my record expunged. And so, why did that happen? Because we were well connected. We knew a lot of people, not because we were wealthy. Mom couldn't afford, a good attorney to go find what probably really wasn't a felony in the first place, because we had, permission and key from a member of the family. But it didn't really hit me until I started applying for college. I only applied twice to 2, and that was Arkansas and SMU. And when I started filling out the app, I got to the point where it said, have you ever been convicted of a felony? And that was what the question was back then. Now they've expanded it to cover, have you ever been accused of a misdemeanor? Mm-hmm. But back then it was just that. And so I really stopped and I was like, it hit me right then. If I check this box, I don't have to, thank goodness. But if I had to, would I get accepted? There was probably a good chance that I wouldn't. And I got accepted to both schools, picked Arkansas. And, I was lucky enough to have been well connected. So every time since then, it was on the application. I applied for my first cell phone, which is still, this phone is still the same application that I filled out in the late 80s. There was that question. And so I just every time I just said a little prayer and thank God that I was so well connected, that we were so well connected. And I always felt like the thought of all the people who either they're not connected, they can't afford an attorney, or they just don't understand the process and, get that felony on their record, and it stays with them the rest of their lives. I always felt like when I can't, I'm going to do something.
So contrast that path with your friend Don D. Walford, and he had a different path.
Yeah, that's a great, thanks. You actually read the article. So Don D has worked for me now for at least 12 years. He worked part-time before that. Don D is a year older than me. I'm 58. He's 59. He's black. He's from South Dallas. He got a high school diploma. And he got out of high school and just same as me. It was, what do you do? And, he was working odd jobs, and he was, smoking pot and doing things he just like a lot of us do, he shouldn't have been doing. And he needed, money for pot. And so he decided he was going to rob a house. And this is the finest man. He's just a good man. and made a bad decision. And he went to a house near Fair Park in Dallas, where we have the state fair, Texas, and which is where the area that he grew up in. And he saw a house with no lights on it. And so he decided that it was empty, which it was not. There were people inside. So he went up and started trying to pry the door open with a screwdriver. And luckily they didn't shoot him, because Texas law, they could have shot him through the door and killed him. But they called the police. And he's a lousy burglar because, we all know how long it takes the police to respond. And when the police pulled up in the driveway, he's still standing there trying to pry open the door. And so they arrested him, took him in. He could afford an attorney. He wasn't well connected. So he got a court appointed attorney. And of course, that guy's going to get paid $100 or whatever. And so the guy just said, look, we'll pop a plea deal, and get you 6 months probation. And after you keep your nose clean, then it's over. Well, it's not over. Number one, so that's just a lie, which is very common in that situation. He's going to have a felony the rest of his life. But also, he's on probation and he has to go see his probation officer. It's $12 every time. So he went to see his probation officer a couple times, and the second, third, or fourth time, I guess, he didn't have $12, so he skipped it. So they issued a warrant for his arrest. So he gets pulled over a few days later for a light out or speeding ticket or whatever, and they check him and they figure out there's a warrant out for his arrest. They handcuff him, put him in the back of the car, leave his car on the side of the road, take him to Dallas County Jail, and within a few days, he's in front of a judge, and he gets sentenced to 1.5 years in prison. And he served 1.5 years in prison for that attempted burglary. But really, it wasn't for the attempted burglary. It was because he didn't have $12. Now, again, he made a mistake. He should have called and said, I don't have $12. And I'm sure they would have said, come in and you can do some community service. That's typically what they do in Dallas. But of course, they don't tell you that. Because if they tell you that, then a lot of people are going to take that option. Now they do, but they didn't then. I think the indigent across the country are treated better today than they were back then. So I think we've made progress. But the point. So here's this guy, and I had no idea when he first started working for us part time that was his story. And as I got to know him and I learned his story, then it just made me even more passionate about it.
So what are your views on criminal justice reform? Why is it necessary?
Well, I think that, you asked me that question, and I asked when we interviewed President Trump or candidate Trump. We were Cruz supporters, and then when Cruz dropped out, obviously we were Trump supporters because the alternative wasn't an option for us. And so 2 weeks later, he came to Dallas, and so we're pretty big donors. So we had an interview with him, and I asked him the same exact question. And he said, and I agree with this, he said, I believe in fair justice. And I said, what is fair justice? He said, well, I believe that if you've committed a crime, then you should pay your debt to society. You should make restitution if there's any damage to another person. And then once that's all done, then you should be free to go out and become a productive member of society. And furthermore, we should help you get there. So we should have prisons called a correctional facility. And generally, there's nothing correctional about our prisons in the United States. It's just a place to lock people up and keep them locked up to punish them. And, I think prison is a place that we should lock up people we're scared of, not people we're mad at. In 2005, we had the number one, we were the most incarcerated state in the country per capita. Now, we're still in the top 10, by the way, but it's not we've made a lot of progress. And it's through programs that Governor Bush started, and Governor Governor Perry really put into place. And their diversion, with the help of obviously the House and Senate, and their diversion programs where if you have a drug charge, you go go to court, and instead of going to trial, if you agree to be diverted into a rehabilitation program, then and you make it through and you keep your nose clean for a certain amount of time, then the charges are dropped. So you're never convicted. And it's really been successful. So we've closed that and a lot of other things. We built a lot of, instead of building new prisons, we built beds, therapy beds, rehabilitation beds, mental health beds, hospitals. So we've closed 8 prisons and 7 juvenile detention facilities since 2007.
Yeah, so Texas has really been on the front lines of this criminal justice reform movement. And in many ways is a surprising, it's an unlikely state to do that, because you sort of think of maybe more liberal Democrat-led states, and Texas is deep red Republican state with the governors like Bush and Rick Perry. And yet y'all have led the nation in common sense, fiscally responsible, humane policies that offer second chances to people. And so you had a huge role in that in Texas. You helped partner with Texas Public Policy Foundation to found the Right on Crime organization that is a partner of ours that we work with closely and does great work around the nation. How did you take your experience in Texas and your friendship with Jared Kushner and ultimately President Trump to help get the federal First Steps Act across the finish line?
So after the president, we campaigned with Don Jr., I did, and we were very involved. We were the very first presidential trustees in President Trump's and the candidates Trump's campaign. Once he was elected, then I get his assistant called and set up a call, and it was his chief of staff who got on the call, and they offered me a position out of country with the administration. And although I was very flattered, I had no desire to, one, work for the federal government, two, live in another country at this point. So I'm on a mission to clean up our justice system and make it fair and equitable for everyone. I can't do that from another country. So I told him that. He was a little surprised, but he knew what my mission was. And he said, well, what can I do to help? And I said, I know the family really well, but I don't know Jared. I know Ivanka. I know everybody. I don't know Jared. I said, can you introduce me to Jared? I want to be an advisor to him and to the White House Office of American Innovation. And he said, well, Doug, we've already sat down and gone through our priorities for the first term. And unfortunately, CJR is not on it. I said, that's okay. Just get me in front of him. And when it is on the list, then I'll be able to, I'll be there. So he did. So 2 weeks later, I'm sitting with Jared. And he immediately said, we cut a deal and I'm going to help him make it a priority. And so we slowly but surely just started working on it. We had a big summit in the Indian Treaty Room in the Eisenhower Building, which is next to the Capitol. And we had Republicans and Democrats there. We had 2 senators, 2 congressmen, 2 governors, and then advisors on both sides. And it went really well. And I took Brooke Rollins with me, who, as you know, at that time was president of Texas Public Policy Foundation, to represent Right on Crime. Jared came over and was very complimentary of how the whole event went. And then he said, Doug, we need to make Brooke part of the team. She's really impressive. Brooke said, okay, that's a deal. I'll do it. And so she and I started going up every 4 or 5 weeks, from May on. Eventually we had to allow him to hire her away. And it was supposed to be for a year to a year and a half. And now she went in and she took over the White House Office of American Innovation. Now she's director of the Domestic Policy Council for the president, one of his top 3 advisors. So that's kind of where it all came together. And, the First Step Act is a reincarnation of the bill that we actually worked on in 2015.
Well, and that piece of legislation has been a real inspiration to us in Mississippi. As you know, we are the second highest incarcerated state today. a year ago, we were the third highest, and
Right.
we have made some progress. We're moving in the right direction. Other states are making bigger, faster, more aggressive moves. And so we actually went from third to second, which is not a good thing.
No.
We lock up more people than just about anywhere in the world. And that's both a terrible choice for the people involved with our justice system and their families. But even equally important is it's an incredibly expensive endeavor to keep going. And so Mississippi's at a moment where we really have, since the beginning of the year, been in a prison crisis. We've had 60-something deaths in the prison system. We are now under investigation by the Department of Justice. And lawmakers here are facing a choice. We're going to have to either spend a whole lot more money building prisons and hiring more guards, or we're going to have to reduce our population safely, but reduce it nonetheless to make sure those that absolutely need to be behind bars stay there, but those that don't need to be there have an opportunity for a second chance. So what would you say to Mississippi lawmakers to encourage us to follow the federal progress on this and Texas's progress?
I think that what you've got to do is get to your governor, get this in his head, and that is that everything we do is first and foremost about public safety. Obviously, he's vetoed and has not been particularly supportive of criminal justice reform, but I think it's just a matter of him really kind of opening his mind a little bit and understanding what the problem and what the issues are. Eliminating the mass incarceration. That's a fantasy of the left. And we work a lot with the left in Texas and other states and at the federal level. Here, it's pretty easy to come to consensus on a lot of issues, and criminal justice reform is one of them.
In closing, why should conservatives care about this? There's a lot of other things that conservatives care about. Why should this be close to the top of the list?
There's so many things that this is appealing to conservatives for, the values, the Christian values of redemption and forgiveness, the fiscal qualities of it. We're saving money. We're taking someone who in the system today gets locked up, and you're spending anywhere from $25,000 to $80,000, depending on the state, to house someone in prison, and you're diverting them into another system to keep them out of prison. So you're saving that money. Or if they go to prison and you've reformed prison so that now you teach, get them a high school diploma, whatever you need to do to get them counseling, to get them off drugs or alcohol, get them or mental health issues, counseling for that. You get them back with their families, counseling with their families if they have somewhere to go when they get back. And then when they get out, if they've learned a skill and they get out and they have all their papers and everything they need to be able to re-enter society, then much more likely that they're going to be productive members of society. And they're not going to, recidivism rate is really high across the country for people who have served in time in prison. It's like 75% in the next 5 years. Well, what if we could drop that to 20%? Then it's going to save the state and the country a lot of money.
Well said. Well, thank you for your leadership across the nation on this issue. It matters, and you're making a difference, and I'm grateful for it. And I'm grateful for your time, and this was a great conversation today.
Thanks, Grant. I appreciate it. It's an honor to be on your show.
Thank you.